Welcome back to Outdoor Exploration. I have been asked to give chicken updates because we haven't done that in a little while, and I thought while I'm at it, let's give you a bit of a food forest, medicine forest update. Because, as you know, if you've been watching for a while, we're trying to develop a kind of food forest here on this tiny little bit of land that we rent. We rent from my parents, so we have a lot of freedom here. But I'm calling it a medicine forest. And as you see, I'm all idyllically sitting in my among my beans and my rose hips. They're a little hard to see right now because they're green, but they will be red in the maybe November. We have peaches slowly ripening just beyond the rose hips there. That's a big peach branch. I can reach out from my hammock and pick my lunch. It's like paradise. But it isn't always this idyllic, obviously. Sometimes I hear the chickens behind me. Sometimes I hear them crowing a lot. And this isn't to say it's bad, but I don't want to give you a picture that is totally false. So this food forest, medicine forest we're trying to develop is idyllic in my mind, despite the less idyllic things like running out in the middle of the night to fix a leaking roof, or killing injured chickens, or, you know, saving plants that have died, and harvests that we thought we were going to get which have failed, and of course all the beautiful things too, like harvests that are bigger than we anticipated, and beans that we can pick and eat from the hammock. But what really is idyllic is the connection with our ecosystem, and that's why we're doing this. That's why I do this video series. That's kind of my passion in life. So I thought today I'm going to take you on a little tour of how I came to be building a medicine forest at this place. It started with my parents, who bought this land in, I think, 1980, and it was forest. This was just a piece of forest, and they planned to develop it. So I'm going to take you to a little spot that is quite similar to how it was when they began 40 years ago. Come with me. So this little spot of land beside where my parents cleared is very similar to how the forest was when I was about 4 and we moved here. It was, you know, this is a little sort of floodplain from the creek that I'm standing in, full of grasses and weeds and some little ferns that never really make it very far before they get flooded out. Some alders, I mean that's quite an old alder there, and cedars. You can see the place we live behind me. But basically this is an ecology of different plants all coexisting together with insects and small and large animals. Deer come here, squirrels. We don't have a whole lot of wild mammals here. We do have cougars on the island supposedly, but not really around here. And birds. Many different types of birds. And not including my chickens that we're listening to right now. So this ecosystem is kind of what my parents brought me and my brother into when we moved here. And they started clearing. But as they were clearing, I was exploring. And I, you know, learned what all these things were just by playing with them. When you play with sword ferns, you discover that at certain times of year, like right now, they're letting all their spores go, and you're walking around in it all. You discover that, you know, you can pick certain types of grass and whistle with it. I don't know if this will work, but let's try. I learned that from my father when I was growing up right here. So as you explore all of these things, you learn naturally where they would like to grow, how they would like to grow, what they coexist with. You know, I can tell you just by instinctive knowing that I'm not going to find this grass under a cedar tree. I now know as an adult why that is, but as a child, you just know. And that just knowing is actually the medicine of my medicine forest. So that's what I came here to show you. This is where it all begins, the exploring the actual wilderness, the wilderness that grew itself naturally, and learning how all of these things coexist together. And with us, you know, there's a question of, I'm here in my bare feet, but would I go anywhere in my bare feet? Mostly, but not some very barnacly places or some places with a lot of sticks and branches. And those sorts of things are sort of the physical deep knowing that kids especially gather from exploring areas. So I'm taking that deep knowing, which I have cultivated over 44 years of exploring and teaching and raising my kids in the same area, and I'm bringing it onto the piece of my parents' property that I actually rent from them, where I can grow, hopefully, food and medicine in a way that is harmonious with this kind of landscape that we live in. I couldn't tell anybody, not even my neighbor across the road, exactly how a garden would grow at their place, because it's different. For some reason, they can grow raspberries over there and we can't. At least we can, but we don't get berries, despite getting all sorts of other wonderful berries. I know raspberries don't grow very well on my property, but across the road they do. There are just so many things like that that are really specific to the very specific place you are. So come back with me to the property and I will talk a little about how my parents have developed the land and what we're doing with the piece we're using, which is actually quite different again. Hey, this is the outhouse I'm showing you right now. We built this, and the reason I'm showing you our outhouse is because I grew up with an outhouse, which was mostly sometimes used during construction periods, sometimes when we had a power outage. And we actually made this one for use just when we're out in the yard or when we have parties and too many people are there for our using our house amenities. And the thing about both having, using, and building an outhouse is that it makes you aware of your body functions and how you connect to the land. You know, I'm going to eat some food. Maybe I bought it at the store, maybe I picked it in the forest or grew it in my garden. It's going to make its way through me and come out and go into the land. So we had to choose where we put this outhouse. We didn't want it running into creeks or, you know, into near our well, of course, obviously. And yet, what goes in here will be fertilizer for this forest and the land. And it's just a lovely way of knowing my literal input into my ecosystem. And I think when we're on sewage systems and, you know, water treatment systems that are municipal or whatever, we don't actually, hi Kalea, hello, we don't actually think very often about how what we're taking into our bodies and putting back out from our bodies is part of our ecosystem, but it is, even if you're in a city. Yeah, so outhouses connect us to the land. The property my parents bought has really two creeks running through it that converge over there in the forest where we just were. And this one was just a swampy area at this place to begin with, but they had an excavator dig it out. So really what they were doing was working with the water body that was already there to create something more pleasant for them and more usable. So my father has been seeding this with trout that he finds in the creek in the forest and puts them in here, and they grow up, and every once in a while he checks how his trout are doing. And It has a whole lot of duckweed in it right now, as well as a lot of different lilies and things like that. It's an ecosystem in itself, but it's also, and I didn't mention all the things that hundreds of different types of insects, maybe more, frogs and salamanders that all live in here as well. But it's also part of the bigger ecosystem of the whole property. So basically, part of the way my parents gave me the knowledge of how to live in the ecosystem was by doing things like this, having a piece of land that they worked according to what was already there and how the land already was. Because, I mean, you can try and bury a pond or a marsh, but it's not going to go away because the water is flowing from somewhere up on a mountain. You have to think bigger than just the little spot that you have. And so if you work with it and say, great, we have a marsh, let's have a pond. And it takes something. I'm standing on the dam that keeps this pond a pond, but then, you know, the overflow flows down into the forest over there and joins the other creek that comes down the other side of the property. So basically what I'm saying is they worked with the land to create a home that works, partly not just because they already liked what was here, but because you don't want to be fighting the wilderness or your ecosystem to create your home. You want to be working with it. That being the key piece of information. They work with theirs in a different way than mine. You can see their yard is much more determined than mine. They have hundreds of rhodo species, a bunch of different special trees and rose varieties, as well as a vegetable garden, and very specific things that they're growing in a slightly more conventional way. But still, in doing that, they gave me the inspiration to do my food forest. So I'm going to take you over there now and show you where that is. It occurs to me to mention that as I walk past all my parents' apple trees here, my father actually grew up in an orchard capital of the Netherlands, and his family also had an orchard. And these things, I think the connection to the land and the wanting to know where your food comes from and know how you live on the land and how you're a part of it, I think they go through the generations. So it's a gift we can give our children. And I feel like, you know, I'm working on the 4th generation at least of that gift. Maybe more. I don't know what happened before that. This is my parents' most amazing vegetable garden. This is the beginning of our food and medicine forest. So, on to what we're doing with this space. As you can see, we have a mess here. It is nothing like the beautifully orchestrated garden that my parents have, but it's full of life. And basically, I'm taking what I've learned from the forest, from my exploration through my life in the forest and in the fields and the creeks and everything else around here, and both trying to direct my garden a little bit and trying to follow it. So it's always about a balance. I mean, if you look here, I have squash. This is a new squash I'm trying this year, which I love, Gallo Decine. And behind it I have kale, I have some tomatoes. Here, this one's fallen down, but you can see them coming along there. That's a turnip. I have a zucchini in the corner, some various flowers. Sunflowers you can see at the back end beside me. This is a rose. I have so many things. I mean, oh, there are some other squashes there. I have, here, follow me over here. Behind my nasturtiums, I have some butternuts growing here. And, you know, this whole trellis thing, this is one of the things that I've gotten from observation. Squash likes to ramble and climb up and over everything. And I thought, well, if I give it something to climb, then I can make space for the things that want to grow underneath. And it's, yeah, it feels more like a forest to me, you know, like a richness and diversity of life. So under this butternut squash, and under this delicata that's growing over here with a few little delicatas starting, I have nasturtiums and a pumpkin that isn't doing very much, and a bunch of beets back there. Oh, and the corn. I haven't mentioned the corn, but this is also our mini cornfield. I have quinoa in there, and this whole trellis back there was covered in green pod peas, but we've harvested them now. They're all in a bucket in the house waiting for our winter pea soups. As well as it had some cucumbers. And behind that I have broccoli and cauliflower and various flowers. Sorghum, we're trying sorghum this year. And giant kale, I can't remember what else, oh, a giant pumpkin. All that to say, I don't want to keep listing. I could go on forever with the diversity of things we've put in here, and that's just the, classic vegetables that we all recognize. I've also put a lot of clover, various peas, lentils, things that are nitrogen fixers basically, and a lot of hay with chicken poop. Basically, I am throwing everything I can at the land in hopes that it creates its own community. And then I see myself not as the harvester of food, but as part of the community. So I go in and I think, what's available for dinner today? And I might find a few little broccolis. It won't be enough for a whole meal, but who cares? It's some broccoli and some beans and some kale, or who knows, maybe it's weeds one day. Weeds being actually something I harvest quite frequently from my food and medicine forest. So, yeah, that's kind of how I'm looking at it. And part of that, to get back to the chickens that I mentioned at the beginning of this video, the chickens are intended to be a part of this ecosystem. So they do have to live in a fenced area because I don't want them rampaging through my parents' yard and, digging everything up, or more importantly, even being eaten by mink and otter, which are everywhere because of those two creeks I mentioned. So they do live in their area of the yard, but their poop, if you look in here, is fertilizing everywhere. So we line their coop with hay and also yard trimmings that we dry, like all the pea vines. After my daughter harvested the peas, she packed them up into like hay flakes, except pea vine flakes, to line the chicken coop. And then the chickens poop on them, and then we throw the poop and the hay and pea vines or whatever back into the garden, and it fertilizes. So they are an orchestrated part of my medicine garden, and let's go visit them. Okay, I got my shoes on because you don't go in the chicken coop with bare feet, and some treats. Hey, treats! Come on, everybody! Hi, Splash. Hello, Lester. This is Lester Clark, our rooster who finally received his name. This is our other rooster, the Splash. He's a little superhero, a very small superhero. This one is Francie. Sorry, everybody. The one sitting on the roost back there is Big Bird. The one underneath her is Blue. And the one behind the water bucket over there is Kalamata, as in Kalamata olives. And yeah, a bunch of these don't have names yet because we don't really have their personalities. So for the chicken update you've been waiting for, is that stuck? You want some help? You're not much of a superhero right now, hey? Okay. This is pretty much the flock that we're left with after we've separated the roosters that are going to become dinners, and chosen the two roosters we like the best. Big one, the chicken we tried valiantly to save, including doing surgery on her for about 6 weeks. Finally just couldn't do it anymore. She wasn't recovering the way we hoped. Here you go. And in the end I had to put her down, which was horrible and heartbreaking. They say don't fall in love with your chickens, but you can't help it. Seriously, chickens, they're lovely. Yeah. Oh, and this white one, that's Fluffy Face. If you've been following since the beginning, that was our little fluffy faced yellow chick. And anyway, this flock of chickens is going to be what we're left with, and hopefully it will provide eggs for our extended family and a couple of neighbors, as well as fertilizing our garden, as I mentioned, and just generally being a part of our little ecosystem in our medicine forest. Which brings me to my final point. Medicine forest. Medicine is not only the chemicals that you put in your body to fix things. It's also whatever heals you. So here you go. For chickens, maybe their medicine is this wood sorrel and this chickweed that they love so much. For me, sometimes the medicine is, an actual medicinal plant that I grow in my yard, or maybe it's, you're lovely. Maybe it's the food that I've grown or harvested in the wild. Or maybe it's the feeling of wholeness and joy and health that I get from living in contact with the wild. And I think that's really, really important, because we know that our mental and emotional health has so much to do with our physical health, and this is the medicine. People do forest bathing just to get themselves into the forest, to clear their minds and to be healthy. I want to live that way every day. I don't want to have to do that to heal myself when I'm injured or sick or sad. I want to live that way all the time. So, hence trying to grow a medicine forest. And lastly, I want to say, for all those many people I know are watching this from your condos in the city or your house that you rent but can't grow a garden in, it doesn't have to be that you rent a property and grow it the way we are. I've lived in the city too. I grew beans on my tiny, tiny balcony that I don't know if the neighbors were too happy about it, but they covered the whole balcony. I grew pumpkins that I hung off the balcony. I grew a little 1 by 1 meter square lawn when that was all I had. And I've grown pots of plants just however I could. Whatever kind of connection you can build, whether by going out literally into the median in the road where stuff is growing, or into the deeper wilderness if you can get there, or whatever you can bring in the form of little potted plants or pet fish, who knows what it is, but to connect ourselves with the life that shares our ecosystem with us, I think is the very best thing we can do for our health and for the health of the whole planet, because it means we stop trying to live separately and we become a part of our ecosystem. You are just ravenous today. So that's it. I hope that's meaningful, because it is to me. It's kind of like everything that matters to me. That and love. I love my chickens. Happy exploring.